Hi, my name is Michelle Sanders, Director of Clean Water Policy with Transport Canada, and I will be providing an update on the vessel management measures we have in place in the Gulf of St. Lawrence to reduce the risk of vessel strike with North Atlantic right whales. So I wanted to start with a quick recap of our measures that were in place in 2019, as this really helped inform our approach for 2020. So we started the season, as we have in the past, with a large static slowdown area that covered much of the Gulf, which is the pink area on the map, where all vessels were required to slow down to 10 knots throughout the season. And then the dynamic management of the shipping lanes A, B, C, and D, where vessels slowed down if a whale was detected. Mid-season, when we had a number of deaths in Canadian waters, we did introduce a number of enhanced measures to increase protection in the area. And this included expanding the geographic area over which the slowdown applied, increasing our aerial surveillance, as well as applying all of our measures to all vessels over 13 meters, as opposed to vessels 20 meters and above, as it was before. And it was really the enhanced measures that were the starting point for our strategy for 2020. And our approach for 2020 just built off that experience from last season. But then we also wanted to look at what additional new measures we could put in place for 2020 to increase protection as the whales were moving through the area, as we're starting to get a better understanding of some of those patterns, at least, that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. We also were looking to increase our detection technologies to complement the work of our National Aerial Surveillance Program. So we moved some of the technology that we've been testing, the drone and the acoustic glider, from the testing phase to the operational phase. So our overall approach for 2020, this kind of gives you a sense of the big picture. So implementation dates were similar to the past, starting on April 28th to November 15th. We continue to use the static and dynamic approaches, as well as continue to apply all the measures to vessels over 13 meters. Some of the modifications we made from 2019, so again, building off of what we saw and what we put in place as the enhanced measures, is we introduced two seasonal management areas, so SMA 1 and 2, which are the areas that surround the dynamic zone E on the map. These were part of the enhanced measures, but what we did is we introduced it only for the beginning of the season, when we know the whales were kind of moving into the Gulf, and this is an important area that they're crossing through. So these zones were in place until June 30th, and after that, a slowdown would only be triggered in those areas if a North Atlantic right whale was detected on an opportunistic basis. And we also introduced the restricted area, the purple box in the Gulf, as well as the trial voluntary slowdown, and I'll speak a little bit more to those two in the following slides. So the restricted area, the overall purpose of this was to create or to add an additional layer of protection in the area where we've been seeing the whales really aggregating mid-season. So it's essentially an area to be avoided, but we did introduce an exemption for fishing vessels that were operating in that area, just recognizing their ability, their maneuverability and ability to see more easily whales in the water. So those traveling through were to reduce their speed to 8 knots if they were traveling through the restricted area. The timing and the location and size of the restricted area is based on an algorithm that we developed that helped us determine when the whales were really aggregating or settling within that area in the Shediac Valley. So based on our calculations, the aggregation kind of settled around August 2nd. And so the interim order was put in place on August 2nd and was actually only recently lifted on October 9th. So the two maps you can see here just give you a sense of the change in the vessel patterns as a result of the restricted area. So both the before and the after. Of course, this is only vessels with AIS, but this gives you a good sense of the changes that this created through that area when whales were really there in a large number. The other measure that we introduced was the trial voluntary slowdown. So we all know that Cabot Strait is, so not only is it a very important navigation corridor, it's the main access to east coast of Canada and the Great Lake ports. It's also the main migration route for the whales as they're moving in and out of the Gulf. So this, we wanted to put something in place that would provide that extra layer of protection. But it's also a very challenging navigation corridor from a safety perspective due to the uncertain weather. So this was implemented on a trial basis to allow us to collect data and better understand what some of those challenges are, and working with our industry partners to better inform what an approach could be going forward. We've implemented this in 2 phases. So in the beginning of the season, when the whales are migrating into the Gulf, and then the second phase is our fall phase, which is in effect right now, as the whales are migrating out in larger numbers. So we've started to analyze some of the data from the spring season. Obviously, we'll be building off of this for the fall period of the trial. I will say that something that is really difficult for us to quantify is the impact that COVID had on the overall participation rate. We know that the number of new protocols, the safety considerations, the crew fatigue, the overall uncertainty and challenges that COVID introduced is something that is really hard for us to understand what that impact might have been on overall participation. But even with that, we saw a 43.1% participation overall in the slowdown. And of those that did not participate, 65% of them were actually only within 2 knots of hitting that target. So overall, we saw a reduction in speed across all vessel classes during the spring trial period. Some of the other factors that we were looking at, as I said, this is a challenging weather corridor. So we wanted to monitor to see what impact, had this been implemented on a mandatory basis, what impact weather might have had on the slowdown. We have a protocol in place in the Gulf where our static slowdown zone is that if gale force winds are at a certain rate, we lift the slowdown because it's unsafe for vessels to travel at 10 knots if the weather is a certain condition. So the dates that are highlighted in red in that column of the table show you when we would have had to lift a mandatory slowdown as a result of our weather protocol. And the yellow lines there kind of show you when we actually did lift the slowdown in the static zone during that same period. The other factor that we knew we had a sense would probably impact participation rates was if there was a slowdown triggered in one of the dynamic. So we wanted to monitor that and assess what impact that had on participation, and that's where you see if either there was a slowdown as a result or get a flight up, and so that's what those graphs show you there, and you can see the correlation to the participation rates. We've also been working closely with our industry partners just to get feedback from them and information from the vessel operators to understand what their reason for not participating was. So we distributed a survey to vessel operators and are doing the same for the fall period, and asking them to help us understand why they didn't participate. Was it weather? Was it due to scheduling, contracting issues, or something else that we might not have thought of? With the mandatory measures, we continue to see a very high level of compliance. We've only issued 4 penalties so far this season, to over 99% compliance rate with our mandatory measures. So very pleased to see this and appreciate the ongoing collaboration. Monitoring and surveillance is obviously critical for us to be able to implement our vessel management measures, especially the dynamic approach. And so we continue to look at ways to improve and increase our toolbox. That we've introduced this year, been in a testing phase, and that have this year were introduced to help with our dynamic management approach. So the drone, or the RPAS, was deployed in dynamic zones A and B for about a month to help clear those zones, and the acoustic glider was deployed in zone C and continues to operate there until October 20th, at which time it will be sent down to Cabot Strait. And the glider didn't waste any time. Within 24 hours, I believe it was, of being deployed in Zone C, it already detected a North Atlantic right whale and has had 7 other detections to our toolbox. The NASP obviously continues to be one of our main sources of surveillance data, having flown over 280 hours this season, with an effort to fly at least 2 times per week over each of the zones. We continue to implement a protocol that if we are unable to get a flight up during a set period of time, that we will trigger a slowdown on a precautionary basis. So that's when you see slowdowns kind of being lifted and implemented on a very quick basis. It's because of weather considerations. This gives you a sense of our overall weather pattern or flying patterns over the course of the season so far. Obviously, a strong concentration in the dynamic zones, but also over the restricted area. And this is because NOAA was unable to fly over Canadian airspace due to COVID. We had to use one of our assets to be able to fly over the restricted area to help inform our algorithm and the implementation of the restricted area. Collaboration continues to be a really important part of our work to help inform our measures and ensure that we are taking into consideration operational realities. We held a workshop back in September that really helped inform the Cabot Strait slowdown as well as the restricted area, and that ongoing exchange between various partners has really helped continues to help inform our approach. One of the new groups that we created this year was a technical subcommittee for the fishing industry, and this is our measures. Vessels over 13 meters, we wanted to ensure we had forum to better understand the impacts and considerations for that sector going forward. We will be analyzing that data, obviously, once it ends and to help inform our approach going forward. We're also currently exploring options for testing a land-based infrared camera in and around Cabot Strait to better understand presence in that area. And of course, are starting to engage with our stakeholders to inform our approach for 2021 based on our lessons learned and what we're seeing on the water. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to receiving your questions and comments during the live panel phase.